My name is Howard Thurman. It is the purpose of this cassette, or better, the purpose of this recording, to tell in very simple words the experience out of which the Howard Thurman Educational Trust initially emerged. When I was a boy living in Daytona, Florida, the public school for Negro children went only to the 7th grade. This, as it seems to me now, was a calculated affair in order that the community, and particularly the Board of Education, could resist the pressure from the property owners in the 3 segregated areas of the town from being successful in getting a public high school for their children. The logic was very simple. If the children in the 3 segregated areas could only go as far as the 7th grade, and if it were impossible to enter into high school unless one had completed the 8th grade, then in the absence of any students who had completed the 8th grade, there would be no necessity for a high school. When I finished the 7th grade, and I went to work, as all the boys did of my age and generation, the principal of our grade school was so impressed with what he thought of as my promise that he urged my mother to make an arrangement with the man for whom I worked to let me take 2 hours for my lunch each day and work an hour longer in the afternoon or at the end of the day. This was arranged so that I could spend an hour each day at the public school during the noon recess in order that the principal might teach me the 8th grade. At the end of the winter, he said to the superintendent that he had a boy who was ready to take the 8th grade examination and could pass it. Logically, as far as the superintendent was concerned, there was no such boy because no such provisions had been made in the public school system. Whereupon the principal said, I have been teaching him on my recess period every day, and he's ready, and I would like to give him the examination. Instead, the superintendent said, I will give him the examination, and he did. I passed it, and in a reasonably short time after that, the 8th grade was instituted in our community. Now I was ready for high school, but there was no high school, as I've said. In the state of Florida at that time, there were 3 public high schools for black children in the entire state of Florida. But there were several private schools, church-related or church-supported schools. One was in Jacksonville, the name of which was the Florida Baptist Academy. I wanted to go there because I had a cousin who lived in Jacksonville, he had told my mother that if I came to Jacksonville, I could live with him and his wife, do chores around the house, and he would give me one meal a day, and I could go to school. Of course, the fact that the school was 5 miles away was just a matter of very little concern. My problem was to get ready and to get enough money to pay my railroad fare to Jacksonville. This may seem very simple to you who listen to this tape, but all of the money that I made in the summer, such as it was, I gave to my mother to help her in the support of the family. For you see, my father died when I was 7 years old, and there were 2 sisters and a grandmother for whom my mother was responsible. The problem of getting the $5 was a very interesting one to me. All of the youngsters in our community belonged to an insurance company into which we paid 5 or 10 cents a week, I don't remember. But it was a sick and accident insurance. You paid this amount of money per week, and then when you were sick, if the doctor filled out your blank, as we called it, and you turned it in, you would get $5 a week for as long as you were in bed, up to a certain number of weeks. I decided that in the fall, I would have to get sick for a week so as to get $5 in order to get out of town. I arranged with the doctor to come to see me and give me some medicine which I needed, because at the end of the summer in Daytona Beach, all growing children needed some sort of purging. The customary thing was calomel at night, castor oil in the morning to get some of the poison out of your system. I suppose at any rate this was the custom. So at early September I had sent for the doctor, and he came and he gave me calomel and castor oil. It took my temperature, and I stayed in bed for a week. He filled out my policy, and I got the $5. The next problem was to get a trunk to go out of town, a trunk into which I could put my clothes to go out of town. There was no trunk in our family at that time, because we had not traveled or we had not been anywhere. But a neighbor whose son had gone to Tuskegee some years before, I did not even know him, had left an old trunk there when he moved away. It was a steamer trunk, but it had no handles and no lock. She gave it to me to help me in my plan. I put my little clothes in it, such as they were, and I roped the trunk, sent it down to the railway station, packed my little suitcase, bade my mother and my grandmother and my sisters goodbye, and I went to the railway station to leave on the 3 o'clock train in the afternoon. I bought my ticket, and then I went around to the railway express, or the baggage room, to see about checking my trunk on my ticket. When the ticket agent saw my trunk, he said, "Boy, you can't send this trunk on your ticket, because the regulation is that the tag has to be attached to the trunk, not to the rope." Since there were no handles, the only thing that I knew to do was to have him attach the tag to the rope, which could not be done. He said, you will have to send it by railway express. I had no money to do this, because after I bought my ticket, I had about $1.25 or 30 cents left. I left the baggage room, crestfallen, walked around to the front of the station, sat on the steps with my head down, crying my heart out, because all my dreams were gone now. I would be embarrassed, humiliated, my parents would be embarrassed and humiliated, and my hope for getting an education had vanished. At last I opened my eyes, wiped the tears, and I saw two large feet, two large brogan shoes, as we call them, standing right in front of me. I let my eyes crawl from the shoes all the way up until they rested on the face of a man who was standing there. As I looked at him, he was reaching into his jumper pocket for a sack of Bull Durham tobacco. He took it out with his left hand, opened it, and then into another pocket he took a piece of cigarette paper. He emptied some of the tobacco into the cigarette paper, rolled it into a cigarette, sealed it with saliva, put it in his mouth, took one of the end of the string of the sack of tobacco, pulled it tight with his teeth, put the tobacco back in his pocket, reached in another pocket to get a kitchen match, struck the match on his thumb, lighted the cigarette, inhaled deeply, looked down at me and said, "Boy, what the hell are you crying about?" I told him. Whereupon he said, "Come with me," and he took me around to the baggage master's place, and he said, "How much does it take to send this boy's trunk to Jacksonville?" He was told. He counted the money out from a rawhide leather bag. He gave it to the agent. The agent wrote him a receipt. He handed the receipt to me. And he said, "Boy, if you're trying to get out of this so-and-so town to try to get an education and improve yourself, the least I can do is to help you." Now, the extraordinary thing about this event is that he had never seen me before, and I had never seen him before. He told me goodbye, wished me well, and disappeared down the railroad track. But if he had not done this, I would never have left home, I could never have received an education, and I would not be where I am at this moment. On my way to Jacksonville on the train, I made a promise to God. One, that when I finished my education and got a job, the first thing that I would do would be to send a letter to my mother to tell her that she did not have to work any more. She could come home and not be burdened by cooking 7, 8, 9, 10 hours a day, 7 days a week to keep our family together. That she could take her ease, spend her time doing the things she loved, having a garden, her chickens, and visiting the sick and that sort of thing. The second thing that I promised God was that every year of my life, as long as I earned any money, I would try to do for some student who was determined to educate himself or herself what that man had done for me. And all through the years, I have kept this promise. In 1961, the Howard Thurman Educational Trust was organized under the laws of the state of California. There were 3 original trustees. Mr. Gene K. Walker, a businessman in San Francisco, and who had been associated with me as chairman of the board of the Church for the Fellowship of All Peoples when we bought the building in which the church now is housed. Mrs. Thurman and I, we were the 3 trustees. Since that time, the number of trustees has increased. They are Attorney Boyce Gross, who is a practicing attorney in San Francisco, Dr. Staden Webster, a professor of education in Berkeley at the University of California, Dr. Nathan Huggins, professor of American history at Columbia University, and Mrs. Ellen Klimperer, a farmer and a very distinguished member of the Society of Friends living in Richmond, Indiana. The work of the trust has developed along 3 fundamental lines. First, we give what may be called enabling scholarships. That is, our funds are so limited that we are unable to enter into the big field of endowed foundations whose income is in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Instead, our scholarship program deals with individuals based upon personal knowledge and contact, either the personal knowledge and contact of a trustee or of some faculty person located on a particular campus who can relate to a student as counselor, friend, and so forth. In other words, we are not in the scholarship granting market, as it were. We have limited funds. We select students with whom we or someone who represents us can have a personal relation of guidance, of counseling. At the present time, Our scholarship program is confined largely to schools in the southern part of the United States. Nevertheless, always, since our very beginning, we have had some students who were in colleges or universities in other parts of the country. The second part of our work has to do with the intercultural aspect of human relations. It is one of our convictions in the Trust that experiences that are meaningful between people are more significant than all the fears and prejudices and anxieties that divide them or that separate them. And if you can multiply experiences of unity between peoples, you can undermine any gulf or that separates one man from another. Or, to state it more accurately, you can undermine any barrier that separates one man from the other. The way by which this has been done in the history of our trust is to help our own community, the black community, mine its own past and its own history, to develop more and more a sense of its own root, a sense of its own idiom, a sense of its own heritage, and the way in which its root, idiom, heritage have influenced the whole stream of American life. It is this sort of thinking that caused us initially to invest in the Afro-American Museum, which started in Boston during the period when Mrs. Thurman and I were a part of Boston University. And now the seed money which we gave to that institution there has blossomed into a very significant institution, contributing much to the understanding and to the rich cultural and ethnic significance of the life of that old and very beautiful city. The same thing is true in the Historical Society in San Francisco. The other aspect of that dimension of our work has to do with a series of international rooms which have been established on several of the campuses in the South. We regard these rooms as windows on the world, so that students on the campuses where the rooms are operative can have a sense of the life of other cultures and other peoples to whom they have not been exposed, and whose habits and customs and manners and faiths are not a part of their own familiar life. On two of these campuses, the international rooms have developed into a very significant international program, and in which, once a year, some person from another culture and another land is a guest of the campus. A series of competitive essays are written around some theme that has to do with world civilizations, cultures, or with intercultural contacts and philosophies and so forth. And this has been a very important part of that aspect of our work. Now the third aspect has to do with the dissemination of tapes, of books, of ideas that represent a lifetime of my own thought and reflection and experience as a man who has undertaken to live his life on the basis of a very profound religious commitment. These tapes are in process of being distributed or made available rather for listening rooms, for campuses, churches, and so forth. This gives some broad feeling about the work of the trust. A final word has to do with where do we get our money. The trust is a public foundation rather than a private foundation. That is to say that the trust is supported by a wide range of people numbering between 300 and 400 scattered all over the United States and Canada. The first great giant step towards our financing took place when I was being retired from Boston University. Usually, the custom there is that when a professor or a dean retires, there is a dinner and he's given a Paul Revere bowl or a silver platter or something, some memento that marks the years and the affection with which he is held. When President Case made such a proposal to me, I suggested that I would not want that. I preferred having a public meeting to which all of my students and friends in the community would be invited, and this meeting would be in honor or as a tribute to a kind of ministry rather than to a person. And anyone who wanted to contribute something to that kind of ministry could contribute to the Howard Thurman Educational Trust, which was already in existence and had been in existence for some 3 years. This was decided upon, and on the evening of the public meeting, the chairman of the committee from the university presented the Howard Thurman Educational Trust with a check amounting to about $10,000. This was the first big grant that had come to the trust, and with that, our program was launched. Since that time, our support has increased. Our contributions range from $2 a year to $1,500. There are 4 endowed scholarships now the income from which will provide about 12, $1,400 a year for 4 students. There are some people who contribute $10 a month, some $500 a year. It is that kind of financial base. Certain other groups, individuals, I think now of One Family Foundation, for instance, that has underwritten all of our expenses of operation. That is, they pay a secretary, telephone, operating expenses. All of the officials of the trust, the treasurer, the bookkeeper, myself as chairman, all of us function without pay. The office of the trust is at 2020 Stockton Street in San Francisco. We maintain there all of the facilities. There are tapes and books and records, a whole collection of things that represent the fruits of my own mind that are being distributed or made available for the widest possible use. And the income from the sale of these creations goes into the support of the trust. It is my conviction that the most difficult thing in the world is to be able to administer effectively to the needs of an individual with money or with any other resource of that sort in a manner that will make it possible for the person you help to forgive you for being able to help him. It is so hard to maintain a healthy self-estimate while at the same time seeking help from someone who is not bound to you by ties of obligation. As difficult as it is to ask for help to meet one's own needs, whether these needs be very private and personal or have to do with the fulfillment of ambition or dream, it is more hazardous to help another in need without patronizing him. The whole issue of putting one's resources at the disposal of another's needs and acceptance of those resources is one of the major moral problems of our time. How may a person expose his needs without humiliation? And how may a person give of his resources to meet another's needs without arrogance? It is because I feel this so deeply that the whole quality and character and sensitivity of the Howard Thurman Educational Trust is shaped. We want to be able to provide the funds wherever we're able that can make a big difference, not only in a person's effort, a young person's effort to fulfill his dreams and his hopes, but also to enable him to be free and uncumbered by a weighty sense of embarrassment because he received help. We are committed to this, and it is our desire that as the years unfold, more and more of our resources may be put at the disposal of the individual needs and of the wider cultural needs, as well as the spiritual growth and renewal of the young people in whose faces the sun is shining and on whom the future of the world